Yesterday, Modi government has now finally released the much talked about white paper that it promised in its interim budget on the state of Indian economy in the 10 years rule of the Congress party, the Congress coalition led by the UPA. Some of the highlights, in fact, of that very important paper is that the UPA government inherited a relatively healthy economy, but by the time they left, the economy was in tatters. Scams on scams were reported unabated. GDP had gone down. Fiscal deficit as a percentage of the GDP was on the rise. And of course, the massive scams as well as the NPAs that the government had to deal with, that the Modi government subsequently had to deal with starting of 2014. My colleague Krishnakumar joining us here on the show. Krishna, those are some very key allegations that the white paper is making, but supporting them with facts. Let's first talk about the GDP. Now, government is stating that the fact that GDP grew between 2014 to 2018 is solely on the back of the reforms that the Modi government has been able to initiate. Right. In fact, the first few years of growth observed in the UPA era was on the back of the fact that there was NDA regime before that, essentially hinting that UPA did absolutely nothing when it comes to developing growth prospects for India and hurting India's fundamentals in order to show some very strong headline numbers.
Right, and they're saying that whatever growth or what was seen, say in the years of from 2004 to 2008, was a matter of lag effect of the reforms undertaken during the previous NDA regime. And yes, you're talking about the GDP number. Essentially, they're targeting 3 to 4 big ticket items. One is the GDP figure, the growth in GDP, which could have been, India was on the cusp of a takeoff. Indian economy was on the cusp of a takeoff when the UPA government took over, and unfortunately, due to everything from policy paralysis to economic mismanagement to scams, all of them riddled the economy and stumbled the economy and brought GDP levels down. Inflation was in double-digit figures, is what the white paper states. There's a balance of payment crisis, and you take all of that, you mirror all of that to now. Inflation from double digits is now just about 5%, just about above 5%. The target is actually 4 to 5% is what the current NDA government is aiming at. So they're essentially showing a mirror and showing the black and white of how things were. It's called the white paper, but you're talking about the black era of the Indian economy up until the year from 2004 to 2014. And if you take a look at it, inflation, GDP, and forex crisis. All these three terms. GDP, India is the fastest growing major economy in the world, and the growth is anywhere between 6 to 7% and only set to grow even further. Inflation has been brought down from a double-digit inflation to a single-digit inflation to one of the best-managed inflations in the world, and with the target range of 4 to 5%. And then forex reserves, why we're talking about $620 billion in forex reserves that we do have right now, as compared to a balance of payment crisis that the UPA government left the next regime with.
And let's talk about some of these factors one after the other. Inflation, high inflation, or mehengai as we popularly call it. In fact, the white paper says that the inflation that raged between 2009 and 14, and common man actually bore the brunt of it. I mean, you can look at some of the headline inflation numbers between financial year 2024 to 14 was about 8.2%, came down to about 5% between financial year 2014 to financial year 2023. Essentially talking about the fiscal management of the UPA government that had gone haywire, and despite inheriting some very strong fundamentals on the back of that NDA regime, squandered away the opportunities that it was given.
Right, and that also, I mean, you're talking about inflation that's almost being halved from the time it was in the decade of 2004 to 2014. Now from 2014 to 2023, it's almost getting halved if it's brought down before the 4%. And this, in a sense, is what is the point that the current NDA government is trying to make. This is where inflation could have been had you managed the economy right. And you keep talking about mehengai and keep complaining about the mehengai under the current government. What was happening in the years of 2004-2014? That's when the steepest of price rise took place. An average of over 8% inflation in the years of 2004 to 2014. Imagine the amount of the cost increase in every single component of the common man's life in those 10 years, which is now being stemmed. The price rise actually from 2014 onwards has been stemmed and not allowed to rise beyond a particular point. But had the previous government been any more prudent, prices wouldn't have gotten to where they are right now already, is the point that's being made in this white paper.
And the fact that the UPA government got its fiscal math wrong, because from 6 years between financial year 2009 to 14, the white paper also highlights how fiscal deficit was at an all-time high, in fact suggesting that the government was not able to manage its expenses very well, and it in turn hurt the fiscal consolidation roadmap that the government should have had for years to come in order to become a developed economy, or an economy that is trusted. And the debt, in fact, that has been on the rise is also as a result of the mismanagement, the fiscal mismanagement of the UPA era. Essentially, all in all, talking about how government did not have its fiscal consolidation path right, as a result of which government, not just the government of the next subsequent BJP era, which had to undo some of those problems, but the economy, which would have been developed perhaps before 2047, would have been a developed economy in the next 15 to 20 years. We were off that trajectory and we were off that path due to the fiscal mismanagement.
Right, and also sort of explains the reason why global ratings agencies have all been skeptical about a country like India, because of all the mismanagement in fiscal deficit over so many years, over a decade, which, as you're rightly pointing out, the current regime is trying to undo. What is the latest figure that was announced in the interim budget? 5.1%, bringing it down from 5.8% to 5.1%
in the next financial year.
A lot of people are calling it ambitious, but at least there is a clear commitment. Even if you look at all the budgets that Nirmala Sitharaman, our finance minister, has presented, there has been a clear commitment to fiscal consolidation, which we did not witness in those years of 2004 to 2014. So it is as if you know, the finance minister with this white paper trying to show, see what we have been doing over the last 6 years and see where we are able to bring it down to, which is 5.1% is what we're targeting right now. Even if we don't do 5.1%, but somewhere get somewhere close to that, it's at least showing intent, and intent backed by action. The question being asked with this white paper is that, was there ever an intent for fiscal consolidation? Forget action. Was it even on the minds of the government of that time, between 2004 and 2014, that India needs to get its fiscal consolidation in shape? And the plain answer, this white paper says, is no. Absolutely.
And another key highlight of that white paper is the banking crisis that unfolded. NPAs that literally doubled down in the UPA regime, and on the basis of the fact that large loans were doled out to people without adequate background checks and without checking whether they had the repayment capability or not, as a result of which banking NPAs became a huge mess that this government had to tide over through, of course, you know, tighter controls on the banking regulator, clean up the mess, the banking mess that the previous government left behind.
Right, and if you remember the first few years at the beginning of the NDA regime, between the years of say 2014 to 2017, all those stories. I mean, we can easily take names over here, you know, from say Vijay Mallya to Nirav Modi, to all of them. It exposed a clear lacuna in terms of checks and balances in the banking system, which was allowed to persist, allowed to balloon up so much that suddenly, when everything came out, it just caused nothing but public anger. And why? Because you had a government, you had that did not put enough effort into regulating the way loans were doled out. Bear in mind, this was a time when you had to dole out loans, but then you had to have the right checks and balances. The banking system need to have the right checks and balances to ensure the fact that the loans were doled out, because you need growth at the end of the day. But at the same time, loans were doled out to the right entities for the right reasons. And again, what does it happen? Can you let banks fail because they doled out the wrong loans? No, it doesn't help India.
And it's taken a long while for banks to clear up their balance sheets post the banking reforms that were instituted by this government has led to NPAs, in fact, also going down at an all-time low as compared to the past 10 years, and that is, of course, the cornerstone of the white paper released by the government. But before we move on, Krishna, and of course we've touched on the GDP, we've touched on the fiscal math, we've touched on NPAs, the white paper also goes on to talk about the scams that the UPA government was literally saddled with. So from a 2G scam to the coal scam, in fact, telecom sector continued to reel under the pressure of the 2G scam, could never take off as a result of the policy paralysis, which is what the government is alleging. This government is alleging at this point.
Yeah, you left out one more thing, the Commonwealth Games scam. So in all of which, you know, what the white paper does is show the mirror to what could have been in those years. You had a 2G scam, and today overwhelming portion of India is covered by the 4G network. And in fact, overwhelming part of India could be covered by the 5G network in a blink of an eye. So compared to a 2G scam, which sort of, again, hobbled the takeoff of the telecommunications sector, a crucial sector for India's growth and development, considering how important telecom is in terms of driving the growth of every sector in this country. And yet, the kind of focus that was given, the way in which the 2G licenses were rolled out, the way in which the 3G licenses were rolled out. Thankfully, by the time 4G came around, you had a regime change, and then things could go off far more smoothly than that. But then 2G and 3G were absolute messes. We were all complaining about the quality of the signals we were getting. We didn't know what all went on in terms of the licenses that were doled out, and and the kind of corruption that went on over there. The 2G scam was in fact one of the biggest undoings for the UPA regime, even as its regime ended in 2014. So one was a 2G scam. The thing is that if it was only one 2G scam, you can talk about the fact that that the government was okay. They messed up on one particular sector. But what about coal? You had a coal gate scam. And what about Commonwealth Games? Commonwealth Games was meant to showcase India to the world. And in this white paper, if you show again in terms of showing the mirror, India in the last 10 years held the G20 summit, and which showcased India to the world like never before. When you're hosting a global event, the headlines are coming out of it should not be the kind of crores and crores of scam that went into it, but in terms of how well India was presented, packaged and showcased for the world to see.
Of course, and that of course is the white paper that the government has released on the 10 years of the UPA rule. What it did not talk about and omitted is the impact of demonetization and what it did to the Indian economy, and whether those notes that black money is back into circulation or not, or whether the white or the black money was converted to white money because over 99% of the currency was back into the system. All of that it did not talk about. It was a matter of omission, but that white paper, of course, making some serious allegations on the previous 10 years of the UPA rule, and also asking some pertinent questions on where the growth prospects of the country lie and the state of economy up until today.